One of Britain's youngest killers walks amongst us today, completely anonymous. After serving only 11 years in jail for the brutal manslaughter of 4-year-old Martin Brown and 3-year-old Brian Howe, she was released from jail at the age of 23. No one will ever know the whereabouts of a woman who at the tender age of 11 took the lives of 2 young boys. Our story starts deep in the inner boroughs of Newcastle in the United Kingdom, a place called Scotswood. The families that lived in the soon-to-be-demolished houses were lower-income families waiting to be rehoused by the council.
Newcastle was in the grip of massive redevelopment. The worst slums were being knocked down to make way for new high-rise flats.
The children of those families were allowed to run free and play unsupervised from 2 years old. The children often played in the abandoned houses and wastelands close to the railway line. It was a different time and no one suspected dangers ahead.
You could literally leave doors open. You could go to bed and leave your front door or your back door open.
If the children got into mischief, the neighbours would check them.
It was Saturday evening on May the 25th, 1968. 4-year-old Martin Brown went out to play with his friends in the abandoned homes, but his parents started to get worried when he didn't come home. Martin would often play outside with his friends and come home in the late afternoon for his tea, but he never made it back that day. One day after his disappearance, the local kids sadly discovered Martin's little body at one of the abandoned houses not far from his own home.
I ran up to the houses and I seen a crowd of people stand outside. This guy had Martin in his hands. And he was grey. And he felt cold, so I took my cardigan off and I put it around him. And this man, there was tears running down his face. And I said, "Is he alright?" He says, I don't know.
Martin's mother June was mourning his death when she received an unnerving visit. The little girl she recognised as one of the children in the neighbourhood, Mary Bell, was on her doorstep and she had a strange request. She asked to see June's son. Taken aback, June let the little girl know that Mary couldn't see her son because he was dead. Mary just replied, "Oh, I know he's dead. I just wanted to see him in his coffin."
With that, I slammed the door in her face and I just collapsed behind the door. And my husband had to come get us and he had to send for the doctor.
This was not the only strange event surrounding little Martin Brown's death. Soon after his death, the local nursery was vandalised, and when police arrived at the scene, they found a few eerie handwritten notes stating that Martin's death wasn't an accident. One said, "I murder so that I may come back," and another said, "We did murder Martin Brown." A lot of the circumstances surrounding Martin's death were suspicious. The 3 boys who had initially found Martin Brown in one of the abandoned buildings they were playing at were shortly joined by 2 girls who stumbled across the scene. The 2 girls were Mary Bell and her friend Norma Jean Bell. Despite their similar names, these 2 girls were not related. The girls watched as a local tradesman performed CPR on Martin to no avail. The small boy had sadly died. The police could not figure out what could have caused Martin's death, because other than the small amount of blood and foam found around his mouth, his body displayed no other clues which could point to any one manner of death. However, the police did find an empty pill bottle near his body, and took this to mean that he must have accidentally overdosed. The police had told June Richardson that her son had died from ingesting pills. Later, the coroner would declare that Martin had not died from swallowing pills, but that his cause of death was suspicious and undetermined. The community was outraged after his death. They protested and pleaded with the council to demolish the dangerous abandoned buildings. Some local children even got involved with the protests. One of those children was Mary Bell. Norma Jean Bell also joined her as they carried banners and marched. On the evening of July 31st, 1968, 3-year-old Brian Howe did not come home after a day out playing with his dog. When dinner rolled around and he still hadn't come home, his parents began to worry and enlisted the help of the neighbourhood to find their baby boy. The neighbours were all too happy to help, even the local children joined in. Mary and Norma Jean offered to help and joined the search for Brian. Close to midnight, however, the search party found Brian's body in a wasteland.
And I says, "What's happened?" She says, "I've found little Brian Howe and he's been murdered."
The state of his body made it clear that he had been murdered. He had cuts all over his body, and his neck was bruised from where it looked like someone had strangled him. In addition to the cuts and strangulation marks found on Brian's neck, he also had superficial stab wounds on his thighs, cuts on his genitals, and a chunk of his hair had been cut off.
His little legs showed that there was puncture wounds in the calves of the legs and other areas of the legs. The scissors or whatever had been used to cut the boy's hair had also been used to puncture his legs.
However, the most spine-chilling mark found on him was the letter M carved onto his body. The strangulation marks baffled coroners. It seemed that the force exerted on Brian's neck was enough to kill him, but was not enough force to be inflicted by an adult. The only reasonable conclusion was that another child had killed Brian. What child would do this to another child? It clearly wasn't an accident. The police threw all they had at the investigation. They went door to door asking people if they had any information that could give them a clue as to who had committed this horrible crime. By this point, they had concluded and told Jean Richardson that her son Martin's death probably wasn't an accident after all and was likely connected to Brian's.
There is with a bombshell that they'd looked back into Martin's death and they were 60% sure that Martin had been murdered as well. Couldn't believe it.
They interviewed around 1,200 children, but it was their interviews of Mary Bell and Norma Jean Bell that had them curious. Not only did they see strange behaviours from the girls, but they noticed a severe lack of empathy from Mary Bell. The stories the girls told about that day just didn't sit right with the police. The girls admitted to playing with Brian, but claimed to have not seen him after lunch. Details of Mary and Norman's account for that day kept changing. And then, during one of the following interviews, Mary told the police a story that could solve their entire case. Mary told investigators that on the day of Brian's murder, she saw him playing with one of the boys of the neighborhood. While the boy and Brian were playing, Mary said that she saw the boy hit Brian. She also claimed to have seen this boy holding a pair of damaged silver scissors. After hearing this story, police knew that Mary Bell, the baby-faced 11-year-old girl, may be their killer. You see, scissors matching this description were found near Brian's body, and the marks found on his body were likely made by these scissors. Details about the scissors were never released to the public, however. So how would Mary know about the scissors unless A, the story she was telling was true, or B, she was indeed the killer? The problem was that Mary's story could not have been true because the boy she claimed to have seen playing with Brian was at the airport that day, so he had a solid alibi. Police interviewed Norma again on August the 4th, 1968, and it was during this interview that Norma claimed that on the day of Brian's murder, Mary had taken Norma to see Brian's body. She said that Mary told her how much she had enjoyed killing the boy, and even showed her the razor she had used to carve the M in his belly. Norma then took the police to the place where she said Mary had hidden the razor, and the police were able to locate it. Norma would later make a full statement admitting to actually being there during the murder. The evidence against Mary began to pile up. The police also managed to make a connection between her and the handwritten notes found at the local nursery school. Even more evidence came from Mary Bell's school, when her school teacher, Mr. Foster, decided to go over her workbooks to check if she had written anything about the deaths of the two boys. She had. Extraordinarily, on the cover of one of her school books, she had written, "Boy found dead in old house." Within the book itself, she had written further, "There were crowds of people besides an old house. I asked what was the matter. There has been a boy who just laid down and died." Beneath this, she had drawn a picture of the dead body of Martin Brown, and next to it, a bottle and a pill, which she had labelled tablet. She had also drawn a figure of a workman finding the body. None of this information had been released to the public, however, so how did she know the details of how he was found so clearly? When police interviewed Mary once more and let her know what Norma had said, Mary became extremely defensive and called Norma a liar, denying the whole thing. She finally admitted to being there when Brian was killed, but insisted that it was Norma who was the one that killed him. Unfortunately, the police still did not have definite proof that Mary had murdered the two boys, so they let her go. However, her freedom was short-lived, because when a detective saw the look on her face during Brian's funeral, he knew that he had to arrest the girl before she killed again. After further questioning, both girls' stories started to fall apart. Norma started cooperating with the police, implicating Mary. Mary Bell claimed she was there during Brian's murder, but tried to blame it on Norma once again. Finally, Norma and Mary were arrested on August the 7th, 1968, the day of Brian's funeral. During a psych evaluation before their trial, it was determined that Norma was intellectually delayed and had the mental capacity of an 8-year-old. Mary was found to suffer from a psychopathic personality disorder and was the mastermind of these crimes. The prosecutor told the court that the reason for Mary Bell's murders was solely for pleasure and excitement of killing.
Mary's method was to massage the necks of the boys and tell them they had a sore throat and that she would make it better. And her grip tightened and tightened until it caused the deaths.
At trial, the prosecution presented their mountain of evidence. Norma's confession, the interviews from both girls, the handwritten notes, and the fibers found on both boys matched a dress Mary owned. In the end, Mary was convicted of the manslaughter of both Martin and Brian. However, she did not get a murder conviction because the jury believed that her psychopathic personality disorder diminished her culpability and that she couldn't be held fully accountable for her actions. Norma was acquitted of all charges as she was deemed an unwilling accomplice who had fallen under a bad influence. It's so hard to believe that a young child could commit such horrible crimes. Was Mary born to be a killer, or did something happen in her childhood that changed the course of her life forever? Mary Bell was born on May 26, 1957, and the first words Mary's mother said when she was handed her newborn baby was, "Take that thing away from me." Mary's mother, Betty McCricket, was a 16-year-old sex worker married to Mary's stepfather, Billy Bell, a man known to be abusive and a violent alcoholic.
I mean, the whole estate knows about Mary's mum, not just to go away for days or sometimes go away for weeks. And basically she was known as, the lady of the night sort of thing. In other words, prostitution.
Well, Billy Bell, Mary's father, was well known to the police. He was a big, rough chap, gypsy type in appearance, muscular type of man, not the kind of man one would have liked to meet on a dark night, certainly. But when one considered that Mary was brought up in a household like that, what chance could she possibly have had?
Betty would often disappear for days at a time and leave Mary and her older sister with their stepfather. When Betty was home, she would abuse Mary horribly. Mary was said to be oddly accident-prone. On one occasion, she fell from a window. Neighbours, however, claimed that they'd witnessed Betty throw Mary out the window, and this had caused a head injury. This head injury could maybe explain her psychopathic tendencies. Another time, Betty claimed that Mary accidentally overdosed on sleeping pills. However, it's now believed that Betty actually fed Mary these pills and intentionally caused the overdose. The clumsiness was obviously a cover for all the times Betty physically abused her daughter. Some attribute the accidents to Betty's determination to end her life, while others see apparent symptoms of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Nevertheless, Betty enjoyed the sympathy and the attention her daughter's accidents brought her. Perhaps the worst of the abuse was the sexual abuse that Mary suffered because of her mother. Her mother, who was a sex worker, allegedly offered Mary to her clients when Mary was just 4 years old.
But something must have made her do these things.
Yes, something possibly must have made her do these things.
The abuse Mary faced at home was not the only trauma she experienced. When she was younger, she had witnessed her best friend, who was only 5 years old at the time, get run over by a bus. With all this trauma, it's no wonder Mary became violent and a threat to other children. In fact, she had been a threat long before she committed her first murder. Not long before she killed Martin, a boy she and Norma were playing with fell from the top of the old air raid shelter. He was severely hurt, and it was believed that one of the girls had pushed him. Another time, Mary shoved sand down a girl's throat.
Norma pinned us down, and Mary had grabbed us by the neck and started strangling us. And then she had her hand here and she was getting the sand and then pouring it in my mouth. And I couldn't go in quick enough, and she was trying to stuff her fingers down, basically, to get it further down. And obviously I was terrified. And I think Norma was a little bit frightened when she seen what Mary was doing, because Norma jumped up. And by that time, she had jumped up and I managed to struggle and get free and run home.
These violent outbursts were normal for Mary, and her schoolmates quickly learnt to be careful around her. It makes me wonder if these tragedies could have been avoided if someone or anyone had recognised the signs and given this girl some much-needed help and put her into a loving home.
There was really little or no emotional attachment at all. This made the child really feel she had little or no emotional attachment to human beings around her, and therefore nasty things could be done to them because it didn't mean anything.
By 1980, Mary Bell was released from prison as they were impressed with her treatment and rehabilitation. She was released on a license which technically meant she was still serving time but could do so while under strict probation. This meant that in total, Mary Bell served just over 11 years in prison, making her 23 years old by the time she was released. Since her release from prison, Mary has given her account of her childhood and crimes to an author who wrote her biography. Mary even received money for telling her story.
Anonymity is supposed to work for the rehabilitation of offenders and to give them a new start in life. She didn't take that chance for that new start in life because she decided to write a book and collaborate with Gita Serini on that book to make profit from her crimes that she had done.
She gave birth to a daughter and managed to secure a court order that granted her and her daughter anonymity until her daughter turned 18. That court order was later amended, stretching out to the rest of her life as well as her daughter's and her future granddaughter. 11 years hardly seems long enough for killing 2 young boys and ruining their whole family's lives. Martin Brown and Brian Howe never got a chance to grow up and live their own lives. Their family suffered so much heartbreak and stress whilst they saw their children's killer receive protection and freedom. June Richardson, Martin's mother, heartbreakingly said, "It's all about her and how she has to be protected. As victims, we are not given the same rights as killers." Whilst I agree and sympathise with her completely, on the other hand, Mary Bell was a sick and abused 11-year-old who desperately needed psychiatric help.
So much depends upon what happens to anybody in the first year of their life. You see, if they're never exposed to loving attention in those early years, they don't learn about love and they don't learn about warmth, emotions. And so maybe if she had been exposed to loving care from the start, things would have been different.
This is not an excuse for Mary's actions, but her behaviour obviously isn't normal. It takes an incredible amount of deeply inflicted pain to make people act in such vicious and violent ways. If Mary Bell had grown up in a safe and loving home, her whole life might have gone completely differently. Whatever your opinions are on this case, I think we can all agree on one thing: there are no winners here.